Hello, welcome to Ruminations on Tony's Tall Tales. I'm your host, Anthony Pavlich. Thank you so much for joining me and listening today. I'm really excited to introduce a very special guest on the show today. He is an Emmy award-winning producer and director, a talented writer, and a very, very great friend. Welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I am doing fantastic, and now I'm blushing. Thank you so much for that very sweet introduction, and it is a pleasure to be here. And I don't know if you had planned on going into it, but you and I, for the sake of listeners, I will mention that you and I are very good friends. You are one of my absolute best friends. I have known you since, gosh, we must have been sophomores in high school.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, something like that. So it was 67 years ago. Yeah, I think Dwight D. Eisenhower was the president. America was coming fresh off of World War II. No. We've known each other a very long time, and I've always respected you as just an wonderful human being,
Aw.
creative genius. Like you are a fantastic guy, and you've always been kind of. If I ever need to center myself, a conversation with you is there's no better medicine. You are
Oh.
just very calm, cool, collected, pragmatic. And you have all the right answers, man. So I always love chatting with
Wow.
you. And so this conversation here today, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to yet another wonderful conversation with you.
Thanks, buddy. Well, now it's my turn to blush. So it's incredibly kind of you. Creative genius. That's a that's high praise. um,
I accept cash or check for that statement.
do you accept Venmo, PayPal?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. It's on its way right now.
Done and got it.
So that's awesome, dude. So yeah, we have known each other for several years. I know even though that we don't not in the same state anymore, we have done our best to try to stay connected. Over the telephone. Again, another old timey invention way back when. But yeah, I've always enjoyed our conversations, and yeah, same to you. I feel like you're a great friend. You're just a great human being, and yeah, it's just been a pleasure to pontificate with you. So I wanted to bring you on because I feel you got a great sense of story and experience with writing, even though I'm sure you think you don't.
You would
But I
be
think
correct in that
yeah,
assumption.
but I think it'd be very valuable because you do have a very strong filmmaking background. And I wanted to start there and begin with tell us the story, Papa Van Hoesen, how you got started in the entertainment industry and specifically filmmaking.
Yeah. Quite literally, as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a filmmaker. I'm a child of the '80s, and I don't think anybody could argue that the '80s didn't have some of the most amazing cinematic masterpieces we've ever seen.
Yeah.
The blockbusters. I guess what Jaws was probably the first quote unquote blockbuster, but then the '80s was just one after another, after another, after another. And so I don't know if it was that, but quite literally, I can't pinpoint the exact age because I was so little. But I mean, I must have been 6 years old, 7 years old, and just watching these movies as a kid, and I loved them. And I thought, well, who makes these? I want to make these. I want to tell stories. I want to do that. And so as a kid, I would, of course, we all tell stories with our toys when we're kids. And then that transitioned into somehow I finagled my parents into purchasing a camcorder,
Oh,
which,
nice.
as you can imagine, wasn't the at the time is fantastic. Looking back now, it's a laughable piece of technology, but I absolutely loved it, and I thought I was, just the bee's knees, making my own little movies, and I had a blast, and I loved it. That I did that throughout school, so middle school and then high school. And I guess in middle school, I actually that same camcorder I would use. So there would be some sort of a school assignment, like, oh well, write a report on X Y Z, and I would always approach the teacher afterwards, after class, I should say, and say, hey, rather than like a written report, could I submit like a visual report? And it was a pretty novel concept, and so most
Oh,
of the time
wow.
they'd be like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And so I would make some sort of a school project that revolved around video storytelling, and
Mm.
I'd like. I wish I had them. I'm sure they're god awful, but I wish I still had some of them. But they always made me feel good. They were always received well. I think they were, pretty well done for the technology and my young age. Um, and so that just reinforced my love of filmmaking and storytelling. And then that followed through to high school, and then that followed through to college. I went to film school, got my degree in filmmaking. And that was at a really interesting time because we I quite literally halfway through my film school, we there was a shift from analog filmmaking, so
Mm.
8 millimeter,
Yeah.
16 millimeter, 35 millimeter film, where you had to actually really, really, really pay attention to focal lengths and f stops and t stops, and you really there was a lot more technicality involved with the filmmaking itself, and I absolutely loved it. I loved all of that, and you had to splice it yourself. Cut the film and splice the film together. And so you really had to know what your edits were, when you were
Mhm.
doing that. Uh, and then I'm not joking. Quite literally, halfway through, there was a shift where it's like, well, hey, now there's this new burgeoning digital medium that we can use, and so we started using digital cameras and editing on computers, and this was all very new at the time, and it was exciting and it was fun, and I think one of the most one of the things that made it most intriguing is sort of an instant gratification. You didn't have to shoot it and hope
Yeah.
that all of your T's were crossed and lowercase J's were dotted. Uh, you didn't have to send off your film and wait for those dailies to come back and spend money, by the way, shipping and developing and shipping back.
Yeah.
You could just watch it. You could watch it, import it in the computer, and you can just watch it. Or watch it on the viewfinder or whatever. And so that added a whole excitement, and I think that changed filmmaking as a whole for the better for everybody. Whether you're a novice, an amateur, or a full blown pro. So, anyways, went to film school, and that was great. Graduated film school, had a wonderful time, and we can drill back into that afterwards if you want, because you and I worked on some projects in college together. But after that, started my own production company, and a lot of fun, tons of fun there. But of course, it's starting any business is always dicey at first, and so it was minimal success. It was what it was. I From there, I got an opportunity to work in the news field. I worked for a CBS affiliate marketing, and I spent a lot of time there, and it was wonderful. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the type of filmmaking that I would have loved to have been doing on a daily
Yeah.
basis. But it paid the bills. I was getting to do what I loved and pay the bills. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to be doing, but I can't complain. I also wasn't out there, doing heavy manual labor. I got to, somebody paid me to write, somebody paid me to shoot, somebody paid me to edit and tell stories. Sometimes those stories had guardrails on them, because as much as I would like to make a Michael Bay style video, sometimes it's like, that's not really what we're doing here. So you have to
Yeah.
you have to understand, your client and what you're doing. But anyways, long
Just
story
want the
short, so I did
chicken
that.
to walk through the door. Just the chicken walking through the door.
I just, as much as I would love somebody to just have handed over ungodly sums of money and been like,
Yeah.
"Hey, tell your story, just whatever it takes, tell your story," that wasn't the case, and so, but it was great. I had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time doing that. Won some really cool awards. Made some amazing friends and met some amazing people, and had incredible experiences that I otherwise would never have had in life. But there was always that drive. There was always that drive to tell my stories and my own stories. And so, life has a funny way sometimes of pivoting. And so, one of the major catalysts that happened was I shifted into animation, cartoons.
Mhm.
And that's not the type of filmmaking that I went to school for, but it was exciting and different and new and fun. And just the same way that shift back in college happened from analog to digital. This shift was equally as exciting because it was like, oh man, well, instead of working in real time with real cameras and real footage, with animation, you get to completely construct from the ground up your world, whatever that world may be. It doesn't exist, and you make it exist. And that was really fun and really
Yeah.
exciting. And so, I shifted into that, and it was. we had some success with it. And so I was able to parlay that into producing original cartoons for Comedy Central,
Yeah.
which was an amazing opportunity. And again, met some amazing people and wonderful, wonderful experience. And then from that, I was able to parlay that. I did some custom animation for the TBS network, and then that led to some development work with some folks that I won't. It never saw the light of day, so
Yeah.
I won't name names or anything here. But it was development work that development hell. Everything was great, but sometimes things change or whatever. So there were a handful of projects that never actually came through to fruition,
Yeah.
but still got to work on them, and it was a
Yeah.
ton of fun, and I absolutely loved it. And so I feel like I've been rambling for the last 4.5 hours, so I apologize. Now's a good time for the listeners to wake up. We can get back to an actual conversation instead of me putting you all to sleep. But so that's sort of the story of me. The long and short of it is I've always wanted to be a filmmaker, always wanted to be a storyteller. I don't know why. Um, it's just something that was, put in my soul that, I like telling stories and I want to tell stories.
And did you find that was movie watching a communal experience for you? Was it a family thing, or was it just more of you watching your own videos and wherever it was, or was theater going a very big thing for you?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, I suppose it's both. Of course, as a kid, I have to credit my parents for, watching all of these phenomenal 80s movies that I said, sort of initially inspired me, and TV shows as well. Like I'm a big TV lover as well as a cinema lover. Um, and so, it all starts out that way. But, it was also, there's always that insatiable thirst. And so, I would watch I'm equally as comfortable watching something by myself as I am in a communal space. Um, but something that I realized early on that I try not to say too much about it. So I hope I don't annoy the people around me and the loved ones around me. Is I just these days, well, I shouldn't say these days, from an early age rather. Um, I find it hard to watch something just from a strictly entertainment, average user
Mm,
point of view. So if I watch TV or if I watch movies, I'm constantly analyzing
mm,
every aspect of that. And so I would be analyzing the story itself. How is the story progressing? Why is the story progressing? But then also the technical side, like, oh man, that's cool. How'd they shoot this? How'd they light that? How'd they get
mm,
the audio for this? What about that? Uh, graphic effects or the sound design here is fantastic. Um, so it's really interesting. And so I'm sure there are people around me, my fiance and my loved ones who are, whether or not I realized I was doing it, I was probably commenting on all of that stuff constantly and annoying them. I try not to, but in my head, I just, I find it hard to just watch something strictly for the entertainment value. I'm always kind of dissecting it from that filmmaker's perspective.
Have you found then that your ability to just enjoy it for the fact, the pure joy of enjoying it is a little bit lost sometimes?
No, I can see how that would definitely be a possibility, and I'm sure that's happened in the past. But I do still absolutely enjoy it. I think it's just a different type of enjoyment.
Mm,
But I wouldn't say that viewing things from that lens has caused me to not enjoy whatever it is I'm watching, unless whatever I was watching was just crap. At which point I wouldn't enjoy it one way or the other. But if something's good, I will absolutely love it, regardless of how I viewed it and how I dissected it.
yeah, because I've thought a lot about that myself because as some of the listeners know on this show, and then also other another show that I've done, that I've been extremely critical with the MCU currently, and
Mm,
also just big blockbuster franchises in general.
mhm,
And but it's an interesting point that you made that I can still enjoy certain productions, even though they're quote unquote not the greatest. But I just sometimes I have a really hard time letting go certain critiques in others. It may be because yeah, I'm more invested in it, or maybe I'm more passionate about the project, and so I'm a lot more critical because I too am looking at it a lot of times from not just the entertainment presentation of it. But yeah, like the behind the scenes stuff that you're talking about, especially me as I'm trying to develop my writing process and just become a writer, that I'm very critical of execution and in writing, and I'm very harsh on stuff that I really, am passionate about when it doesn't do that process justice. But then again, it's just my own opinion, and yeah, so it's tough. So that's why it was interesting if you saw that, since you have the behind the scenes, of how the sausage is actually made.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you do bring up an interesting point that I think there has been a shift for folks like yourself or I who maybe dissect things from more of a technical how the sausage is made standpoint, and then just the average user who just wants to enjoy whatever it is they're consuming.
Yeah.
um, there's been this shift with again, it's another technological advancement, but this concept of streaming. Netflix, sort of, I'd have to look. I'm sure they weren't the first person to stream, but they certainly were the first one to do it properly, and that's why they're the juggernaut they are. And then, but now of course we have all these other, just everybody has a streaming platform, and they're all fantastic in their own ways. But the point being that there is this shift, even with the average user, now in this streaming world where people are hypercritical and they're ruthless. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. I think that forces people, the producers, to step up their content levels. Because back in the day, again in 1947, we would all run out to the video store. Uh, and on a blockbuster Friday night, that was the most exciting thing, right? You'd go, you'd peruse the shelves, and based on the cover art alone, you'd read the back and think, yeah, this is fantastic. So you would take your tape up to the front, and you'd check it out, and you'd pay your $5 or whatever it costs for a couple days, and you take it home and you'd watch it, and you would hope that it was good. But even if it was pure dog shit, pardon my French, even if it was pure dog shit, you would still watch it because you put in a buttload of effort. You got your happy ass off the couch. You drove all the way to the blockbuster. You spent your hard-earned money, and you brought it all the way back. And if it was crappy, damn it, you were still going to see it through to the end. You were going to watch an hour and a half of pure garbage because you paid for it. But these days, it's the back button. It's no more than pushing a button. If something starts and it's not doing it for you, boom, you're out. Start another one. Boom, you're out. Start another one. And you can just rapid fire, boom, 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 until you find that thing that strikes your fancy. And so I think there's just this weird, not weird. Again, I think in a lot of ways, it's for the better. It's just people in general now view everything media related through a very different lens than they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think also too, social media obviously being a big component of that, with criticism. And I think unfortunately the line has been blurred for a lot of people on what is legitimate criticism and what is just hate and
Right.
virtual,
Right.
just spewing out garbage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Um, and I think that's where it gets lost, that it's because again, and Dave Chappelle is a fucking genius for highlighting this recently, when he got control back of his own
Mhm,
name
mhm,
and
mhm,
his own show, that the audience is most precious resource is our attention.
mhm.
And we don't realize how powerful that is, because every corporation now is vying for a sliver of that. And if we as a collective harness that power correctly, we could change a lot of things. And I think instead of spewing out hate, if we were to, spew more constructive criticism and holding just creators to just a higher standard, higher bar, but then also understanding that we don't own any of the creations. So what somebody does with Star Wars really doesn't give me license to basically go on a tirade and basically threaten people with violence and hate and all that
Right.
other bullshit.
People
But as a passionate fan, I can still criticize execution, stories that I want to see, stories that I want this universe to tell because I, as a fan, am invested, and voices that I want to see. So I think that's unfortunately the line because of social media has been blurred, that it's not so distinguishable to others. And I think we need to get back to being like where the simpler time is, like you said, where what are you out? I spent a couple hours, a couple bucks, and it didn't enjoy it, but that doesn't give me license to say, oh, this person should rah rah
Yeah,
rah rah.
it's just the internet for better or worse, and it's better. I mean, obviously, we're all the world is infinitely better because of the advent of the internet. Um, but going back to those old days where you would get off the couch, go to Blockbuster, or whatever. That was a very linear course of action.
Yeah,
It was a very. I mean, sure, you get to the store and you have a couple hundred tapes to choose from, but essentially that's very linear. And now, though, with streaming, I mean, it is the complete opposite of linear. It's infinite directions. I can go
yeah,
any direction. I can go to Hulu, or I can go to Paramount Plus, or I can go here, I can go there. I can go to horror, I can go to comedy. I can do this, I can do that. And you can do it all at the again, the literal push of a button. And so, those guardrails are off. So it's no longer that linear way, and so it's going in every different direction. And that's why I think it's so hard to to vie for people's attention these days, as you mentioned, is because people are talked at 100,000 times a day. Billboards driving to work, and ads in your
yeah,
ads here, ads there, visual ads, audio ads. Everybody's trying to get you to do this, get you to do this. They want your attention. Essentially, they want your dollars, of course, but they have to get your attention to get to your money. um, and so it's a very different world, and we're still so freaking new at it. It's burgeoning every single day still, but even so, it is all still very, very new for us. And we're kind of blazing these trails as a species, as we go, because who knows where all of this is going to be in 5 years or 10 years, because even 5 years ago, there are things happening today that we didn't even know about
yeah.
would
In
possibly.
5, 10 years, we might all just be burned up.
Yeah, and so it's exciting. It's exciting, but just the cacophony of
Yeah,
content is relentless right now, and it probably will never not be relentless, because again, I don't think we're ever going to get back to that linear way of consuming.
yeah, and that's a great point that you make because also too, it's just it also when I get off my high horse and I stop talking about my tirades about this blockbuster not doing very well with their story or this story wasn't as great. It's still when I really sit back and think, it's really incredible how any of this stuff gets made, let alone the stuff that is still extremely good
That's true.
because of just still it's such a collaborative process. So many people and so many talents need to be brought together to execute some sort of vision. And for the good ones to still come out of that process. And even there's the argument for the bad ones, those still get made. It's pretty incredible. And that's why it's hard to find that balance, I think, because again, like you said, there's so many voices, there's so many productions vying for our attention, just so many, so we're just bombarded by so much information that it's hard not to scream sometimes.
Hmm.
um but yeah, I wanted to get back to a little bit in the beginning when you were developing stuff. What did you find a shift from? I want to say you went from filmmaking to writing, but did you notice that you started wanting to take on more writing and develop your own stuff, or just do more creation since you had that filmmaking skill and transfer it over? Or did it happen at about the same time? Because it sounded like it happened almost the same time that you were beginning your filmmaking.
It's funny because, and I'm willing to bet anybody, any artist in any medium, regardless, it doesn't have to be film or media related at all. But I think we all go through um, these waves where you want to do this, and you put a bunch of time and energy into it, and then for whatever reason it shifts, and you're like, well, now I kind of want to explore this, and you pivot a little bit, and then, well, now I want to do this, and I pivot a little bit. And so I, throughout my life, have definitely um, gone through those. There are times where it's like, what, I just want to shoot. I just want to be cinematographer. I want to tell the visual story is what I want to do. And then, it shifts into what you're asking, where it's, well, I want to write. I want to craft just at the absolute foundational level. I want to craft this story on the written word. And then, there are the times where it's like, well, I want to direct. Somebody else can shoot it, somebody else can write it. I just want to translate that, through the actors, and through the direction. Or, I've found myself lately being in sort of an editing mode, where it's like, well, I want to take all of these existing assets, and I want to put them together into that final product. And so it's constantly changing. It's constantly changing for me. Writing is always, of all of those items that I just mentioned, and all the many items that, of course, haven't been mentioned, writing has always been the most difficult
Oh,
for me. It's
me too.
every one of these is an art form, right? Anybody who's good at any one of these things is an art form, and I am certainly not professing that I am good at any of them. But the folks who are good at any of them, um, it's an absolute art form. Every single one of these people have their part to play. But man, when I see people who are just like writers, and it just flows naturally out of them, effortlessly out of them, I'm just in awe. That's amazing, because that is definitely not me.
Cause yeah, cause it's daunting to look at that blank page,
Hmm.
but also to, like you said, it's an incredible art form to really allow just you to be the vessel to create anything from
Hmm.
this vast well of, either imagination, inspiration, whatever we want to call it. But you literally are creating something from nothing.
Yeah.
Which again I know it's an oxymoron, because nothing, you're drawing something from something, whether it be your own personal experiences, your own views, your own voice. You are a vessel that is tied into the collective unconscious, and you are presenting something that does exist, but just in a different shape and a different form. But yeah, man, I have been struggling with it, as the listeners know, for a while now, just to be able to just get anything done. And yeah, like you said, the people like the Neil Gaimans of the world, and the Aaron Sorkins, and just the Shonda Rhimes. I just, man, the Stephen Kings, like how and the content that they've been able to produce, it's just stunning, and it
Yeah.
really is. And again, we're not doing hard labor. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to create some sort of grand nobility out of writing, but there is definitely a skill to be able to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I think everything is valued equally as important as everything else, right? I would never say that one, this thing, manual labor is more important than this, or this is more important than being that, or blah blah blah. Everything is 100% equally as valuable, is the next thing somebody else does in life, because again, we're all just pieces of the puzzle, and
Yeah.
this beautiful puzzle that we live in, with all of its ups and downs and good and bad. We all have a tremendously important, role to play in that. But certainly, I mean, writers, there is a grand nobility. There's a grand nobility in everything. As I just said, everything that everybody does, and writing would certainly be included, because there's not a single person. Well, I mean, I guess that there are probably in certain parts of the world people who this doesn't apply to. But let's just bear with me while I make this stupid analogy. But there isn't a person alive that um, hasn't had their life enriched by some form of writing, right? Everybody has a favorite song, a favorite movie, a favorite TV show, even just hell, if it's, your favorite bag of chips, somebody wrote, there was a copywriter, somebody wrote, what that bag of chips says, and somebody wrote the advertising that told you about those chips and told you how amazing they were. So, I mean, writing is tremendously important on a daily basis for each and every one of us.
Yeah, I think it's more of the thought of taking the ego out of the equation,
Yeah.
not getting so hung up on the content you do create,
Yeah.
because that no longer, in a really interesting and beautiful way, no longer belongs to you. It's
Oh, yeah.
more of, there's, as a writer who's competent, they can find pride and enjoyment out of their ability to execute that craft, that art, but then still be gracious enough to not get googly eyed over the stuff they do create, because the real good ones, and I feel like the real authors understand that, again, they were just the messenger, and now the form in which they've presented this grand art no longer belongs to them, and it's being um, ingested by the audience in whatever way that they ingest it.
Right.
Like you said, in these beautiful ways where, you know, some people are incredibly moved by these words, and it's, for a lot of people, it's life changing.
Mhm.
It's gotten them out of a certain situation, or at least they can, push through that situation. Um, or yeah, literally, it could save somebody. But it's interesting that, as the more as I try to dive into this thing, it's fascinating to me. It's like we are kind of just messengers, passing along these truths and this knowledge.
Yeah.
When we think back at, we've already talked a little bit about it, but what are some other challenges then that you feel like you face when you are trying to write or create, and it could be even not writing, like when you're trying to edit or you're trying to set up a shot. What do you feel is the most challenging thing for you that you're still working through as a creative?
Every situation is going to be different, obviously, right? Every single challenge is going to be different depending on what you're doing in that moment, what you're trying to create in that moment. For writing specifically, again, I just writing is tough, man. Writing is tough, and so I have a few issues when I try to write. One is that when I write, you know, it I write for what I see, in my head, in my imagination, and it works perfectly. Up in my big old dome, like it works perfectly, but that doesn't always translate to the page. And somebody who's not in
Mhm.
my head doesn't, they're not going to see it. They're not going to interpret it the same way because uh, they don't see all the nuances that I see in my head that aren't being translated to the page. You know what I mean? Um, and so that's one of my things is that, if I were just a one man band for my entire life, it'd be easy enough because, I write, I know exactly what I want, how I want it, how it's going to be done. And then I do all the other steps to see that through to a tangible product. But that's not the way the world works, right?
Yeah.
And so I sometimes have trouble translating in such a way that everyone can understand exactly what I'm going for.
Mm. Yeah.
The other problem that I have is that I'm sort of the way my brain works is I just get these flashes of inspiration for a very specific idea. So it would be a very
Mhm.
specific scenario or a very specific scene or
Yeah.
drilling down to even just a very specific exchange of dialogue or joke or whatever it may be. And I think it's just the greatest thing in the world. I'm like, oh my god, this is fantastic, and start writing it out, and you're like, oh shit, like what that's great, but that's that's 0.000001% of this project. How do I fill in the rest of the world? And then you
Yeah.
have to sort of you paint yourself into a corner because you end up having to back engineer. It's like, okay, I have this
Yeah.
cute little scene or this funny little scene or this action packed little scene. How do I backfill the rest of this project to lead up to that? And then that's just sort of like a fool's errand sometimes because then you're forcing it's not organic. The rest of the
Yeah.
project is all biased and leading to this very specific thing, and then the payoff for that thing in your head was fantastic, but in reality it's probably not going to pay off the same way. And so it's just there are a lot of dangerous rabbit holes to go down that way that will affect the quality of the project overall.
Yeah. It's a great point, man. And I like to dive into some of the ways that we can try to get out of that, or, it might be part of the process. So we're going to take a quick break though. We're going to listen to a message from the Ruminations Radio Network, and then we'll be right back with Matthew Van Hosen.
Hey kids, it's Don Shanahan from the Cinephile Hissy Fit, one of the podcasts on the Ruminations Radio Network. If you've been enjoying this show, come listen to Will Johnson and I fight it out over cinema's best and worst on the Cinephile Hissy Fit. Find us and all the great shows over on ruminationsradionetwork.com.
All right, thank you, dear listeners, for joining us again. Here with special guest Matthew Van Hoesen, Emmy-Award winning producer and director. We've been talking a lot about just his writing, his background in entertainment and filmmaking, and we were discussing some of the challenges we face when we're trying to, start from that blank page, and or as and I think it was really interesting, Matt, that you were talking about, when you just get these images and these flashes, because I feel like that happens to me a lot too, where I'll see a scene or I'll see an image very clearly. And then,
Yeah.
having to go back and just connect everything,
Yes.
because it's like, how do I get to this scene? How do I get to there? What were the events that led up to it? And to make it coherent, and I think that was the key that I think you were, you can correct me if I was interpreting incorrectly, but being able to take what we is in our head and make it coherent, make it make sense, make it flow, make it dynamic, make it entertaining. What are the things that you try to do to overcome that challenge? Is there anything, tricks, tips, or even anything in your process itself that tries to overcome that?
You know, this is probably the part of our discussion where it becomes pretty disappointing because. uh, Hello?
Sorry about that. I might
Oh,
have
okay. I was
I
like,
might
wow.
I might have pressed the wrong button, when I was trying to mute to cough, and, I think something got kicked off. It might have been one
I like that. If we
my
could just intersperse more sound effects throughout, that'd be great. I'd like if you could cue up, please, a slide whistle and a rim shot. That'd be great. Uh,
Sorry, man. I don't know if that, like, we can keep that, because that might have been really cool. It was like, or it might have just thrown you off, so I'm really
no,
sorry.
no, no, it doesn't matter to me. I was just like, oh, is it like is something happening in the background of my computer that's totally yeah, no, that was hilarious. But no, I think this is the point of the interview where I might get disappointing though because I don't when I have those areas I've yet to figure out any kind of a workaround. Except I suppose the
Mm,
one workaround is just time. It's just we've all experienced it, right? The way that the human brain works is you are stymied. You are mired in some sort of a problem and you can't figure out the solution. What are you going to do? It's all is lost. There's no way to fix this. And then so you set it to the side and you go about your life. And then like 2 days later, you're in the shower and out of nowhere, out of the blue, boom, there's your solution, right? I mean, I don't know if that happens to anybody else. It happens to me where it's like at the most random times, you'll be like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? And so, the only real thing that's ever worked, when I get in those situations in the past is just time. And then I guess, letting your subconscious or whatever mechanism it is, work in the background to hammer out those details for a solution because again it's kind of a dangerous rabbit hole. You're trying, you have this scene and you're trying to backfill everything else to lead up to this scene, and the rabbit hole becomes that any sort of tips and tricks that I may have tried in the past, they just further engineer, artificially engineer, because we all want our stories to be organic, right? So anything that I've tried to do in the past just compounds this engineering to force that little scene to work.
mm.
And there's plenty of times where I'm just like, shit, this is just too much. This is just getting too convoluted trying to make this happen. It's not worth it, so drop it. And just it goes away and never to be seen again.
It's interesting because, I've been running into that a lot, especially with the spec script that I've been developing. And so one of the things that and it was kind of the idea of why I wanted to do this show, was part of it was the live journaling aspect of, me as a newer writer trying to figure out how to be a writer,
Mhm.
and then also try to keep myself accountable. It's kind of been two refrains that I've been focused on. Is finding a process, developing it, and then, sticking to it. And one of the things that I've tried to do, because, I'm running into these problems where I've got these great scenes, I've got these great ideas, how to connect them. And when I'm either going back, or, some say you build out an outline, some
Mhm.
techniques say you develop the outline first, then you create a rough draft, then you go back to rewrites. Storyboarding is a big thing with the note cards,
Mhm, mhm,
plotting out things. And, I'm trying to do some of that, especially it's hard as a new writer because I don't have a quote unquote set process. So a lot of it is I am experimenting, throwing the spaghetti on the wall, trying different ad hoc techniques,
mhm,
and seeing if some things might work sometimes and some things might not work. And but one of the things that has been coming up is, and I don't know if this is for you either, um, but trying to go back to what is it that I'm wanting to say? What is this story?
mm,
What's the message?
mhm,
And what is it that I ultimately want to see the character either become or grow from or overcome?
mhm,
And sometimes when I get back to that very basic, and I'm a big proponent of Aaron Sorkin's, acknowledgement of everything's intention and obstacle.
mhm,
Somebody wants something, there's an obstacle in the way. It's got to be a formidable obstacle, and they overcome that. Then there's another obstacle, and then they keep going after it.
mhm.
Um, and so I try to go back to, okay, what does the character want, and why can't the character get it?
Right.
Um, and I don't know if that's for you or if there's other things that make more sense for you when you're going through it.
No, you're absolutely right. Excuse me. I think that's paring it all back. Like an onion, paring back all the bullshit, all the nuance, all of this, all of that, all the style and how cool it's going to be, how sad it's going to be,
Yeah,
how this it's going to be, whatever. Pare all of that away. And at the end of the day, you are absolutely right. It all boils down because every story is about characters, right? And
yeah.
so it shouldn't be about style. Although we all love things that are stylized and cool. It should be about that character, and it should be about that character's journey. And you're absolutely right. So just taking it back to the absolute bare bones question you can ask is just that: what does the character want, and why are they not getting it, and how do they overcome it, the obstacle? So yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I know, as creatives, we're really all just a kind of a little bit to the point that was brought up earlier. We really are just a collection of all the other authors, writers, storytellers, filmmakers that we've watched, been inspired by, and moved by. Um, who are some of those for you? You mentioned a little bit as you're growing up. Is there any that you continue to follow today? Is there any new ones that you latched onto later on
Hmm.
that really, really speak to you, um, as a writer and as a filmmaker?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, being a child of the '80s and being a filmmaker, you cannot ignore the fact that Steven Spielberg is sort of at the top of that pyramid, right? I mean, he just
Hmm.
was and is just the man. Um, so of course, there's that. Shifting more into adulthood for my there. I mean, so many great, phenomenal artists, all of them, absolutely fantastic. I love so many of them. Um, for my money, you know, I think the Coen brothers are just absolute geniuses. I mean, anything they do, I'm sold. Sight unseen. I don't need to know who's in it. I don't need to know what the story's about. Their track record, their brand, for me is enough to get me by. I just love everything they do. Um, Sort of newer, I really love Taika Waititi. I mean, he is an
Mm,
absolute freaking genius, a brilliant, brilliant filmmaker on all fronts. And that's always the dangerous thing, right? Is when people are good at drama and they're good at comedy and they're good at this and they're good at that. When they can cross genres, man, that's when it gets real good. And I think he is just an absolute genius at that. And of course, it's great, having him represent other cultures that don't, traditionally haven't had their stories told and their
yeah,
voices heard. And there's so many great people that he can now bring to the forefront. So many great stories, so many great people, so many great projects that someone like him can now bring to the forefront. And so there's a lot of exciting things. There's a lot of exciting things. But yeah, so I mean, off the top of my head, those are some of the people that I'm most interested in these days.
nice. And is there any shows or films that you've seen recently that you're really, really jacked up about, or have really gotten some inspiration from?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, man. I mean, so many. And going back to Taika. This wasn't coordinated. I hadn't thought about this question. None of this is coordinated, but the two that immediately come to mind for me. Um, First is they just started, I believe, their third season, but What We Do in the Shadows
Yeah.
is just. I mean, I cannot get enough of that because it's hilarious, it's creative, it's just well executed on every level. And also it speaks to me on another level because outside of filmmaking and storytelling and all that stuff, I love spooky things. I love, in my heart, it is Halloween every single day. And so this thing that combines amazing filmmaking and comedy and spooky shit, like I'm sold, man. I am there for it. So I love that. But then he also has a new series on Hulu, Reservation Dogs, which again kind of talks about what I want to talk about with that is giving a voice to these native stories and native stories being done in a respectful way.
Mm,
It's not stereotypes. It's not,
yeah.
it's made, by Native Americans for Native American, well, and for everybody, of course, obviously, but they're not, at least as best I can tell, as sort of a white man, as the on the outside, it seems to me that they are really, it's being made by people who have lived and have authority in the subject matter, and I love seeing
Yeah.
that. I really love seeing that. But then on top of that, again, it's just good filmmaking. It's well written. It's funny. It's well done. The actors are all fantastic, and so there are a lot of things that I really enjoy about that project as well. And so seems to me that Taika has been dominating my time a lot lately. Now that I take a step back.
Nice. So I don't know why this prompted me, but this question then: what do you see when you're watching something and it's not working? Whether from a writing standpoint, a technical standpoint, what is it that you think some productions miss or lack?
Huh.
When we've talked a little bit about it, I think the good point that you brought up is really good about leaning too far into stereotypes and not being an authority on the subject matter that somebody might be presenting. What are some other things that you notice when you're kind of analyzing these productions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it first and foremost boils down to that story. Before you hit the technicals, which absolutely play a role, but it boils down to that story. And so, going back to the technicals for a second, I think people are always willing. A viewer is always willing to forgive. If there's something visually wrong, like if the shot is perhaps not structured just quite right or not lit quite right or whatever it is, they're willing to forgive that a lot quicker than they are if the audio is off. And so if the
Mm,
audio sucks, if it's too low, if it's hissy or poppy, people will not put up with that. But
mm,
those are on the top end, the technical stuff. Before you even reach that stage, then the bare bones thing that will signal, hey, this is good, this is not good, is that story. And so it's the concept of the story itself, sure, but it's that execution in writing and the execution in acting. Because you can have the best script in the world, but if it's terrible actors, it, immediately you're gonna bow out. Or
mm.
conversely, I think if you have the most terrible story in writing in the world, but you have good actors, they can shift it and make it something of interest for a short period of time. I mean, I don't know that anybody would sit and watch an hour and a half of good actors acting terrible scripts,
Well,
but
I don't know. It's reality TV, right? And we eat that up. So,
that's true. We do. But people have different throughout the day, and we're all guilty of it. We have different levels of bullshit we're willing to put up with, and different appetites. It's like one day I might want pizza, but the next day it's like the thought of pizza disgusts me. I want a sandwich, or vice versa. Again, terrible analogy, so bear with me. But we have different tastes throughout the day, and so we have those days where it's like I want something really good, and I know everybody has gone through this. I go through it all the time, where it's like I feel like a documentary today. So you go and you watch a documentary, and then the next day I feel like something really emotional, really well done story. So you go and do that. And then there are the days where you're like, I just want something dumb. I want that dumb reality
yeah.
TV, or I want that dumb, movie. Um, and so, but yes, you're absolutely right. So I think even if, people don't necessarily realize why they don't like something right off the bat, one of the reasons that people dislike stuff is just the story isn't organic. It's just not flowing well, or it's too hokey, or something along those lines. Because I think everybody is pretty savvy to the point where they can identify like, oh, the acting in this is atrocious. These actors suck. And so that's easy enough to identify. But a lot of other people, even writers, I'm not suggesting that I'm any better than the average user, but the writing, we know something's wrong with it. We may not always be able to immediately pinpoint why the writing sucks or why we just don't feel the project is any good. But I think on some sort of a subconscious level, and I'm sure Aristotle would have lots to say about this, with the story of why it works and doesn't work. But on some level, we can almost immediately tell this story is just not good. And then, of course, that bleeds and taints, like, well, now that I'm thinking about it, the acting isn't good. Oh, well, the cinematography is not good. Oh, well, this movie sucks. I'm going to, again, push that back button and immediately find something else on Netflix.
Yeah. Great points, man. Really appreciate it. What I kind of like this question, but it's almost, I feel like it's a trap a lot of times too. What advice would you give your younger self
Hmm.
if you could go back and talk to that, you know, young man back in, what was it, 67?
Yeah, it was 1967. I remember I had just walked out of my first Beatles concert. No, I was
What would you tell Matt Van Hoesen then? And he might not. That's funny thing too. Is like even as your younger self, might not really listen to the older self. But
no, right? Yeah, hindsight's always 2020, and in the moment, you feel like you know exactly what's up,
yeah,
and then you look back, and hindsight's always 2020, and you realize you were way off. Um, you know, I mean, just progress over perfection. I get so stuck even to this day where it's like, well, this has to be perfect. I have to make this perfect. It's like, it's all bullshit. That's bullshit. Just stop. Just do something. Progress over perfection. You can always go back and you can work on it and whittle it down and make it more and more perfect. But just get something done. Just do something.
dude, I really appreciate you saying that. I probably needed to say that somebody else other than my own head telling me, because I think that's the biggest thing that I keep coming to over the last year or 2 years is you you cannot refine something that does not exist.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so in order to refine something, to make it better, to put a little polish on it, it needs to be there. And like you said, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that's where we get stuck a lot of times is this perfection um, mode and this drive gets in the way of excellence.
Hmm.
If you pursue excellence, that I think is a lot more obtainable because that has inherently stuff in it that requires process, refinement, iteration. Um, and I think that's very, very important. I mean, you got to show up. The muse isn't going to talk to you unless you show up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. Um, I really appreciate the time, Matt. Actually, it came to me just as we've been discussing. I wanted to maybe do something a little cool, a little fun, especially for the listeners, the loyal one or two listeners that listen to this podcast.
Okay.
You had sent me this great book, and I think it was one of the books I touched base on that first episode, Save the Cat.
Yeah.
And
Blake
you
Snyder,
had,
right?
yeah, and you had sent that to me, and as I've been going through it, I've been trying to utilize some of those nuggets into my process. And literally, that first part of that book talks about the logline. And so, for you and for these wonderful listeners, I actually want to read to you my logline for the James Bond 007 spec script. And we're going to get your reaction live. I want you to be honest, obviously. I want you to I guess the more the thing is does it compel you? I think that was the whole purpose of that he talks about the log line, right? It's got to be the hook. It's got to
Hmm.
get you right in there. So the log line isn't this first section. This is kind of like this is my little build up for it. But I'll tell you when I'm reading the log line.
Well, I am excited, and I feel honored, and I'm literally on the edge of my seat here. This is cool, man. Thank you.
And this is it's kind of bold for me. Because I haven't really revealed anything about the script, and because I've been kind of close. I feel like I don't want to reveal anything because it's not finished. and it's that hard thing. But I feel like if I thought this was a great opportunity since, again, you gave me the book, and I feel like you're such a talented creative that you would be able to give a lot of insight if I'm on the right track. Um, so here it goes.
All right, all right. Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be fantastic.
So basically, the premise is MI6's most decorated spy is framed for murder. Everything about the Double O program is a lie. The first agent, 001, has turned rogue. The real villain pulling the strings is somebody that is connected to Bond. And now here's the logline. After Bond is framed for murder by the first agent, he must expose the terrorist group responsible while on the run from MI6's elite double O's. As Bond draws closer to the truth, he uncovers a disturbing history of MI6 that will test his loyalty for Queen and country.
Mm. Can I get you to read that one more time? Let me run through that twice. Just the log line, please.
Cool. After Bond is framed for murder by the first agent, he must expose the terrorist group responsible while on the run from MI6's elite double O's. As Bond draws closer to the truth, he uncovers a disturbing history of MI6 that will test his loyalty for Queen and country.
Okay. Well, it's of course, you're. I've always loved everything that you do. So that is a damn good start. Right off the top of my, so would you like feedback? I don't want to.
Absolutely. I
Okay.
want to know if it makes sense. I want to know if it hooks you. I want to
Yeah.
know if there's a better way to construct it.
So what I would suggest right off the bat, well, I mean, that very last line, Queen and Country, love that. I love that. Keep work that in. Absolutely.
Nice.
Just a couple points of thought for me. The lead up to the log line where you talked about, his organization being a lie the whole time, essentially. I would want that weaved in there. Because that is the sort of the crux of all of it, right? It's not so much that he's framed for murder. I mean, obviously that sucks for him, but it's more that pulls back the curtain to reveal that everything he thought he knew his entire life and his entire career is a lie. Also, I know this is ridiculous to have to say this with a character like James Bond, because he's so ubiquitous. Everybody knows who James Bond is, but I would suggest the logline don't write under the assumption that
he's known.
That he's known. Yeah. So I would say, after being framed for murder or whatever, again, I will have to structure a way to work in the lines, but after being framed for murder, international super spy James Bond or something, just something super small, because again, even though everybody knows who James Bond is, you still have to play a little dumb, with the log line and just assume that nobody knows. So there is that. I think it was, two, it sounded like it was 2 sentences long, 2 or 3 sentences long.
Yeah. I mean, they're long sentences, but yeah, it's essentially 2 sentences.
So yeah, I mean, again, without
is that too short? Is that too
no. With the log line, there's
too long?
Usually no such thing as too short. But yeah, I would just keep it short and sweet without knowing the nuances. Something like after being framed for murder, international super spy James Bond discovers his entire stealth, basically, I'm trying to find a good way to describe the organization that he belongs to, but basically he finds out that his entire organization, his entire career, his entire life is a lie, as he tries to pull back the curtain, or I already used that phrase, but he tries to get clarity on and then the line about Queen and country. I did absolutely love the way you ended that. That was fantastic. So basically, if there's a way to combine the 2 sentences, it's okay to have 2 sentences. I mean, they say log lines can be 2 sentences, so that's not a must. Absolutely not a must. But I would just.
But if there's a way to make it more concise,
yeah. If there's a way,
the images and the essence of it still, then do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Try to do that. So it's a little bit more like where it's more, you're it's kind of like what we were talking about with writing, like not over engineering it, but really distill it to its essential components where
Yes.
everything is maximized. So every letter, every word is maximized, as
Yes,
much as
absolutely.
possible.
Maximized and optimized for maximum
Effect.
understandability. So the high points are, obviously who is he? Who is James Bond? Um, what is the problem? The problem being that he's been framed for murder, but it's also his entire clandestine organization. That is there to benefit the world. He found out is an entire lie. So basically, who is he? What's the problem? So James Bond, framed for murder, discovered everything that he ever thought in life he knew is a lie. And why is he doing it? And the why he's doing it
Mm,
is again what I absolutely love, where you said about Queen and Country. I thought that was just because that alliteration, of course, just because it's a log line and
yeah,
it's
it's
somewhat pragmatic, doesn't mean there can't have any style or zhuzh to it. So
yeah.
that alliteration, Queen and Country, is like it just hits you. That's just good
Yeah, it just
marketing.
conjures up so many images, and
Yeah.
it's one of those. It's just packed. You're kind of you kind of already get a strong sense with that combination.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. It's choosing one word over another word can conjure up the perfect imagery in someone's head.
Yeah,
And I think your choice of words is perfect. But I think it's great, man. I mean, just those would be my initial thoughts on it. But again,
that's
take those with a
awesome.
grain of salt, of course. But I think it's great. I love.
No, thank you, and I love it because also too, I think what a great thing is that I need to do more of too, and is it's very easy to live in the vacuum. Um, a lot of this is solitary work.
Yeah.
A lot of it's in my head. I'm looking at it over and over, hours and hours. And so it does. There is value in to be able to have a confidant, somebody that when you talk to writers, almost all the writers with worth their grain of salt have confidants that they present the material to just not necessarily to get any sort of strong reworking or anything like that, but somebody to bounce it off of.
Yeah.
Like it's different when, like you said, when if even if you just say it out loud, you get a different sense, and also too, getting somebody else's lens to look at it, is very beneficial, especially if it's somebody that you trust, somebody that you have strong confidence in their opinions, because like right there was something that I could take from that. There was something that I can think about. Yeah, how do I maximize this? Because again, it's too solitary. It's too easy to, like you said, you know, start thinking that we smell too good when
Well, no, and again, though, I think that's a really solid log line, even without any of my my suggestions or whatever. I do think it's really intriguing. It makes me want to know, well, what is the rest of this story, and more. I guess maybe this is
nice.
the writer and the filmmaker in me. I immediately my mind goes like to the end. Well, how does this end? How does it end? How does he
Mm,
get all this back? And so definitely very strong, man. I'm excited. I'm excited to read this full screenplay. I'm excited to see where this goes. And so yeah, I would definitely commend you. Again, take anything I say with a grain of salt, but I commend you because what you've presented is really solid.
well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it, and thank you, listeners, for indulging me in that. Again, I think it's just a way to try to, I don't want to say demystify, but maybe that's the best word, demystify the process. And it's just writing. We know writing's hard. There's a lot of challenges that we face that are very similar to any other creative endeavor, and it's okay not to feel super comfortable all the time. It's probably a good thing if you don't,
Yeah.
because that means you're probably doing something right.
Yeah.
And also, too, the work is never going to be glamorous 24/7. And anybody tells you is basically blowing smoke up your butt, because there's going to be so many days. You can even ask professional athletes, is every day that they go to play a game, is it, roses and chocolates? It's not.
And,
You know,
and
it, you got to grind.
You got to grind, and you're absolutely right. And if somebody tells you otherwise, and somebody says, "Oh, I'm the best in the world, and I never have a bad day," run as quickly as you can the opposite direction. Because that person, there's no good that can come from that. Because, yeah, I mean, anybody who anybody who is good at their art, I think, is also good enough to understand that there's always self doubt. There are always people doing things better than you or different than you, and you might perceive it as being better. And so that healthy, I mean, don't shit on yourself all day long, of course, but
Yeah.
understand that, like it's okay to not feel like you've mastered it,
Yes.
because none of us have mastered it. None of us have mastered anything. And so, you don't want to be down in the dumps all the time, but you also don't want to walk around thinking that you are God's gift to whatever art
It's a
form
great
you're
point,
doing.
man. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because I feel like, especially in our society, we get too wrapped up in that we have to be perfection. We've got to be productive all the time. We've got to be excelling all the time. I think, I mean, not to get too super heavy, but, we just saw in the last Olympics, we saw somebody at the peak of the mountain have to acknowledge that they had to take a step back,
Yep.
and it's okay.
It's
It's not it's not the end of the world.
100%.
So that's a great point that you brought up. So I appreciate
100%.
it.
It's okay. That there's this the last few years, this prevailing, like, hustle culture that, you got to
Yeah.
be hustling, and, sleep when you're dead, and
Yeah.
I'm hustling, and when I'm not hustling, I'm hustling on something else, and I'm constantly working. And you have to work hard, so I'm by no means
Yeah.
dismissing that, but it's like, it's a recipe for disaster if you just work yourself to the bone and you expect that any downtime you have has to be devoted to your art. It's not. That's going to be counterproductive, and your product in the end will suffer because of it. Hands down,
Yeah.
it will suffer. Self-care and understanding your limits, and just taking your time where possible is
Yeah.
totally advisable.
And just be kind to yourself, like you said. It's okay to have a bad day. It's
Yeah,
okay to feel down, but the most important thing is you get back and you keep grinding.
absolutely.
So, my friend, my beautiful friend, thank you so much again. I want this to give you this moment, an opportunity to plug anything. Is there anything that you would like to share that you're developing, or anything we want to see or check out?
Oh,
Definitely plug.
oh gosh. Yeah, I have nothing to shill locked and loaded. But I appreciate that time.
Show me
Yeah.
your wares, sir.
Well, have you heard of snake oil? Uh, no, no.
Snake oil? That sounds fancy.
Why there, sir? It'll take 10 pounds off your gut and add hair to your head. Uh, no, I appreciate the time. Yeah, I don't have anything necessarily locked and loaded. Working on a lot of fun, exciting things right now. I'm working on some really cool. I mentioned earlier that, my heart is always sort of spooky related. Every day of the year, not just Halloween. And so, I love the supernatural and paranormal. And so I'm working on some really fun projects in that space right now. Very excited about that. But nothing locked and loaded. I mean, if anybody wants to come find me, you can find me on Instagram. It's at Matt Van Hoesen. So at MattVanHoesen. But other than that, man, just thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been a blast. It's always a blast. I opened the show talking about it, but God's honest truth, you are one of my oldest, dearest friends, and I love chatting with you, whether it's on the podcast or just us on the phone. It's
Oh,
always genuinely illuminating, and it fills my bucket back up. If I'm feeling down, I talk to you, and I have renewed confidence and renewed vigor, and so I always appreciate that. And so everybody needs to just continue listening and supporting, because you are fantastic and you are doing some awesome stuff.
oh. Well, shucks. Thank you so much, my friend. Dear listeners, thank you as well. You've been listening to Ruminations on Tony's Tall Tales, a production of Ruminations Radio Network. Please take this moment to subscribe, rate, and review our show. We would love to connect with you on social media at Tony's? Yeah, at Tony's Tales. Visit ruminationsradionetwork.com for additional great shows such as Retro Futurist Culture, Cinephile Hissy Fit. Those guys are fantastic. Brevity Box, Ruminations of Red Rum. There's just so many great podcasts by also fantastic creators. And for all of your burning questions and passionate feedback, please drop us a line at ruminationsradio@gmail.com. And we just launched our Patreon. You can find us at Patreon. It's also linked on our website at ruminationsradionetwork.com. And thank you again. Until next time. Cheers.